Hello everybody and welcome to this special edition of A Game and a Chair, brought to you by the American Civil War Gaming Club. If you like turn-based Civil War games, check us out at acwgc.net. We play the WDS games and we have a lot of fun. The reason we're doing this special episode is because WDS has released a new update, and that is version 4.04. If you're wondering what happened to version 4.03, well, don't worry about it too much. They corrected a few things, they listened to some feedback, and they made some changes. And all of these changes are what we're going to talk about here in this video. So before we get started, I think it's pretty obvious that this is a long video. I did add chapters to the video so you can skip ahead or back to any part that you want to review. You can go get a cup of coffee. You can watch part of it today, part of it tomorrow. But there's a lot of things to go over here, and I think it's important that people know how this new version works and what it's all about. So please take the time, watch it either today all at once or over the next few days or the next week, and learn as much as you can about this new version. It will help you moving forward. So, a little background. This was released in September 2023. Obviously, you already know that, but anybody watching in the future, there's some context for you. Over the years, WDS has released 15 different Civil War titles. If you want to see where all these are ranked on my favorites list, check the past episodes of A Game and a Chair, and you can find my top 10. But for now, let's go ahead and talk about all these different changes with version 4.04. We are going to start with the easy ones first. So we're going to talk about the key minor changes that you can look for in this new version. To begin with, they adjusted the way the scheduled reinforcements with Fog of War are displayed. In previous versions, your scheduled dialog box, which looks like this, would show a unit arriving at a certain time, but they wouldn't show you the probability of them arriving at that point. So you might see question marks where it currently says high, and that is the difference. If a unit has a 1 to 33% chance of arriving, there'll be a low there instead. If it's 34 to 65, it will say medium, and 66 and above, it will say high. So this allows you to better estimate when your units will arrive. And I think this is a good thing. Historically, a commander would have a pretty good idea of when they could expect their reinforcements to arrive on the battlefield. I mean, if the Corps commander says he's going to be there at 7 a.m., he might, come in at 7:20, 7:40, 8 o'clock, and you might be expecting a little bit of a difference. But he's not going to roll in, 17 hours later with a hangover and an excuse, or at least you sure as heck hope not. So this is a good change. They also adjusted it to where when you did have a probability to arrive that did not occur, so you have a unit that is scheduled to arrive at 2 p.m. and they have a 40% chance, but that doesn't happen. Well, during the next turn, they'll have a 41% chance, and then a 42% chance, and so on, up to an additional 10% chance of arrival. This is another perfectly fine adjustment. I have no problem with it. I think there is something frustrating when a unit doesn't arrive on time, so this makes it a little bit more probable that the unit will arrive when they're actually supposed to. Something else that they changed was that they adjusted it so that routed units no longer provide a line of sight, but will detect enemy units within 3 hexes and mark them with a question mark. This is great. And if you're trying to figure out what exactly that means, let me show you. So this is the old version of our game. And one of the quirks with routed units was that sometimes they would go in directions you just couldn't anticipate, right? We've all had that happen. And if you occasionally would get lucky enough, one of your units would route behind enemy lines. And it would allow you to see wonders. And you enjoyed it. Now, when it happened against you, there was nothing more infuriating when an enemy unit would route behind your lines and allow your opponent a completely free view of everything going on behind your front lines. It was completely unrealistic. So, in this example, this routed Federal unit can see all these different Confederate units on the map there. Now, with the new version, that is all that they can see. It doesn't really help them in any way. They can see 2 question marks because they're within 3 hexes. The other units that were previously within their field of vision are no longer within their field of vision. So routed units that previously would give the person being routed a unintentional advantage with line of sight, that is no longer an issue here. I welcome this change. This is something that we needed, and we didn't even know we needed it. So this is a great job by WDS, really giving us something, like I said, we didn't even know we wanted. For the next key minor change, they added weapon medium and maximum ranges to the parameter dialog. What does that mean exactly? Well, if you've ever checked the perimeter data dialog, you will find at the bottom that it lists every weapon along with its range and its effectiveness at that range. Now there's a lot of math that goes into these numbers, which I'm not going to get into right now. But the new thing that they've added is what is outlined there in red. The medium ranges of the guns and the maximum ranges of the guns. And why is that important to notate? Well, because they changed something else. They added medium range for infantry in automated defensive fires. Medium range is the max range divided by 2 for both types, artillery and infantry. In these games, you can adjust your automated defensive fire. If you did not already know this, well, now you do. If you go to the AI drop-down menu within the game, you can adjust these settings. Really, in every game that you play, you should make sure those settings match to what you want them to be. Now, getting back to this new rule, medium range will now be default for both artillery and infantry. I believe before it was minimum was the default, and that really threw some people off, and sometimes they would wonder why their artillery wasn't firing away when the enemy was, 5 or 6 hexes away. Well, that was why your artillery was being told to conserve ammunition. Now the default is medium. That's good. They also adjusted the minimum range calculation for automated defensive fire. The minimum range is set at 1 for infantry and 4 for artillery, so that's good to know. So there was a lot of changes here, which are really helpful for you. Let's go ahead and use an example. Now on the right-hand side, you have the Napoleon guns. Their maximum range is 13, and their medium range is 7. So with this new rule, the medium range plus 1 will become the new Napoleon default setting. So that would be 8. So anytime an enemy unit is outside of 8 hexes from a Napoleon gun, they will ignore them. They will conserve your ammunition. That's why it does that. If they move within 8 hexes of that Napoleon battery, then there is a probability that they will use their automated defensive fire and fire on that enemy unit. So that is what is going on with this change. I like this change. I feel that them giving you this information really helps you to make a better decision about how you use your automated defensive fire settings and to just know how it all works behind the scenes. Alright, another key minor change here is that they added melee combat prediction when on-map results and fog of war are on. Now, inevitably, someone is going to go into panic mode and say that, well, this is not fair. I know all about how melees are calculated, and I've done all my homework. I should have an advantage over an opponent who doesn't know those things, right? Why should the system reward lazy people who haven't done all the mathematical calculations to figure out what the probability is of winning a certain melee? Now, the reality is, don't be a jerk, right? And also, don't overthink this rule, because all this means is this. Ooh, it's not a big deal, right? So if somebody is newer to the club and they're just launching melees because they have no idea what the probability of success is, we'll let them know before they just go blindly launching melees whether or not there is even a prayer that they're going to succeed. So I think this is a good idea. It's not rewarding people for not doing their homework. It's really about trying to help people who might not have all the experience in the world to make better decisions. Again, I like this change. It doesn't bug me at all. All right, some final key minor changes to go over. I'm just going to go over these real quick. They adjusted it so that the cavalry unit side must exceed 50 to exert a zone of control with cavalry skirmishers option enabled. So what that means is whenever you have a cavalry unit with more than 50 men, you will have skirmishers automatically deployed, and that will slow down an enemy advance, especially through wooded areas or really any terrain. Now, if a unit has fewer than 50 men, they will have no effect on your enemy's ability to move through woods or fields or, like I said, any sort of terrain. And that's a good change because there's no way a 12-man cavalry unit is going to slow down a 500-man infantry unit. That's silly. So this is a good one. They adjusted it so that hexes containing captured artillery units no longer need to be continuously occupied to keep the victory points. Points will be lost if the original owner reoccupies the hex. Look, this is all about the artillery capture optional rule. If you enjoy that rule, this will make sense to you. And if you don't use that rule, you don't need to worry about this. If you know it, you know it with this rule. I'm not going to spend any more time with it. It is a good change. Nonetheless, I'm still not a big fan of artillery capture. I find it all confusing, but that is a topic that I'll go into in a future episode, I'm sure. They adjusted it so that leaders mounting and dismounting will not trigger opportunity fire. I have comments about that, but I'm going to hold on to them for just another moment because they did something else. They adjusted it so that the opportunity fire is not triggered if fire value is too low to cause harm. Now I'm going to talk. All right, one of my favorite tactics for I don't know how long, years, has been to take officers and run them around in circles, spin them like a top in the hex, ride back and forth, all in an effort to draw opportunity fire, and it's worked wonderfully over the years. I can't tell you how many times I've had officers fired upon by enemy batteries, and all the shells that I've seen wasted over the years, it makes me smile on the inside. Is it historically accurate? Are artillery batteries really going to be expending that much ammunition firing at a man riding a horse a half-mile away? Probably not. So I totally understand this change. It kills me a little on the inside because this was one of my favorite gamey tactics, and now it's gone. Also, the fire value being too low to cause harm, I get that as well. If you're 20 hexes away with an artillery unit, I might just march one unit over a hill time and time and time again, knowing that the best you're going to do is maybe every once in a while kill one man. I'm willing to trade the 48 shots that you're going to waste for that one man any day of the week. So, this is another change that is really meant to prevent people like me having a little bit too much fun with the game mechanics. It's a good change. Alright, they also adjusted leader movement. Lone leaders cannot approach enemy units within 4 hexes and within line of sight if they aren't accompanied by friendly units or if friendly units are closer. Yada, yada, yada. That's really confusing. All you really need to know is don't use leaders to approach unknown areas or areas held by the enemy. If I need to tell you that, you have a problem which I can't help you with. But, whatever. Another key change is an adjustment so that a unit must contain at least 10 men in order to initiate a melee. Ouch, that hurts. How many times have you captured an enemy supply wagon with a 5-man unit? I've done it. We've all done it. And now you can't do that anymore. I completely understand. I get it. I have no problem with this. It really just corrects, again, one of those gamey tactics that's probably gone on a little too long. Last one is they made an adjustment so that the combined terrain fire modifier is capped at 90%. And I'm laughing because this was, again, one of my favorite, I don't want to call it a glitch in the game, but I'll go ahead and call it a glitch. There are, especially at Gettysburg, a lot of hexes that you could have previously used that would make you 100% impervious to enemy gunfire. Did you know that? I sure knew that. There were hexes with woods, which was a negative 40% modifier. Those woods had stone walls around them, which was a negative 30% modifier. And you could build breastworks, which then made it an additional 30% modifier. Add all those up, that's 100%. If you're at a higher elevation as well, that's like 120%. There was no way through ranged combat that you could inflict casualties on certain hexes. Now, with this new change, that is no longer going to be the case. It hurts me a little bit on the inside, but I'll get over it. This, again, is an adjustment to really a gamey tactic that has been going on, as I previously said, for probably far too long. I like this change. Let's bring some realism back to these games. Alright, now let's go to the key major changes. They adjusted the line of sight calculation routines. After each movement, line of sight is recalculated for the moving units. If new units are detected within 3 hexes, they will be displayed. If new units are detected within a 4 to 6 distance, a question mark will be displayed. Alright, what the heck does that mean? Let's take a look at it because I'm pretty excited about it and I think you will be too. Okay, well, I now have pulled up on the screen in front of you Campaign Antietam. Now, on the right-hand side is the new version. On the left-hand side is the older version. Now, with this new line of sight rule, you're going to notice immediately some differences as this unit, this federal unit here in the center, begins to move. What they're going to do is they're going to move to the northwest into that seemingly open field where the Confederate objective flag is. The first example will be done on the left-hand side using the older version of this game. Alright, so the 19th Indiana is going to move forward and there's no threat, right? There's nothing in that field. They are going right for that objective flag. Suddenly, they get shot at. But you know what? It's only a couple hundred men. You outnumber them, so let's just keep going. That pesky unit, they fired again, right? Not a big deal. You can make that flag. Suddenly, oh no. You are in some serious, serious trouble. The older version of the game, we've all had to experience this the hard way. Where you go out into an open field, you move across it, and you just don't know what is in front of you because the game didn't recalculate the line of sight each time you moved. And that, I would argue, was a problem. It's something that we all got used to. Yeah, it was something that we all got used to. And I guess we didn't even think about it very much because it was just this problem we had lived with for so long that they didn't even calculate how stupid it really was. So when this latest version came out, I was pretty skeptical at first until I realized that the new rule actually makes perfect sense. So let's actually check it out. So on the right-hand side is the new version, and you're going to see how much more realistic this is and why in the long run this is a good thing. So once more, we're going to move across this field here where there are seemingly no Confederates. Well, right away, that federal unit gets warned. They are 4 hexes away from the Confederates, and per the new rule, a question mark is then displayed since those units are either in an open field or in the woods fronting an open field where they can be seen. Now, if those units were deep back in the woods, they would remain unseen. There would be no question mark. And for the units that are at a lower elevation, they remain unseen because obviously there's no direct line of sight there. So they are out of sight. For this federal unit now, they have a choice. They can keep advancing, or they can fall back to where they were and rethink this entire thing. Now let's say you're feeling bold and you want to see what's out there. You can move forward another hex. And wow, what a difference compared to the old version, right? Now you can see there are 5 enemy units and you are marching into a death trap. Chances are at this point you're going to realize this is not a good idea and you're just going to fall back. So the difference between the two scenarios and the two versions is vast. In the old school version, you would walk into a trap, your unit would inevitably be cut off, isolated, and bagged immediately. In the new version, you at least have an opportunity to see what's in front of you each time you move. It's a game changer. It really is. I appreciate this change. I understand it's going to take some getting used to for all of us, but it is a much more realistic way to play this game, and I'm glad they did it. Alright, another key major change is that they added reachable hexes using the command key 0. Once more, let's take a look at what this really means. Alright, now let's talk about what is arguably the coolest part of this entire update. Added reachable hexes. What the heck is added reachable hexes, right? Well, hit the 0 button on your keyboard when you have a unit highlighted. What is that? Yes, now it will show you how far you can move with whatever unit is highlighted until you run out of movement points. That is freaking fantastic. For newer players, this is going to make their lives so much easier. It's exciting. We want to see new players succeed. And for veteran players who have movement points memorized and just know instinctually how far they can go, it was really hard for newer players to compete with that until they had all that experience behind them and they began to memorize the tables themselves. This makes it so they don't even have to memorize them anymore. They can just see how far they can move when they highlight a unit. And it's dynamic. So if I move these artillery units off the road and clear the path, suddenly the 7th Wisconsin can move all the way to here. Whereas before, it could only move to right around here. So it's a big difference. It shows people how they can move their units in ways they probably weren't even aware of originally. And as I said, everything changes. It's dynamic. So when this unit moves, obviously the shaded areas become narrower, and it shows you can't quite keep going as far as you originally could. If we change into different formation, there you go, you can only move so much further. And we've got 4 more movement points, so let's just do that there. So I envision a lot of newer players using this, and it's really going to help them to learn how far they can move on the map and what movement points are and how they influence everything going on with elevation, forests, streams, all of that. It's really going to help people, and I'm very excited that they did this. Alright, so another key major change is that they added the range tool. You can shift and left click to have the distance from the current hotspot displayed in the clicked hex. The display will disappear when the mouse button is released. Let's take a look at this real quick. Alright, so pulled up on the screen here is the Battle of Antietam. And using this new tool, you can get an idea of how far things are away from any unit that you have highlighted. So as an example, here we have the 7th Maine. I'm going to go ahead and highlight them. If you hold down the shift key and left click on hex, now that's a range of 1, right? Range of 2, range of 3, it's not rocket science. And you just sort of get an idea of how far things are away from you. If you're using artillery, this is especially nice. So let's actually use an example here with the 8th Massachusetts, part of Burnside's Corps. Now how far away is Burnside's bridge? If you're just eyeballing it, what, 10, 11 hexes away as the bird flies? Let's find out an exact number. It's actually 15. I was off. So it is a useful tool to have if you're trying to set up artillery and figure out what you can hit from a certain point based on the range of your guns. If you are marching and you need to know how far something is away, let's say you are trying to get these guys up here, well, that's 43 hexes as the bird flies. Now, that's important because if you're thinking that you can get there in 4 turns of just marching, well, you're wrong. Because you don't march in a straight line, you march following the roads because that's the fastest way. So it's actually going to take you probably about 5 turns to get up there, even though it's only 43 hexes to reach that area. So this tool is really kind of a handy dandy little thing that they included. I think it's pretty nice to have, especially with artillery. It'll help you gauge what you can hit and can't hit from whatever hex you're setting your guns up on. Using it as a way to move infantry, it's a little bit less useful, but it does give you an idea, a ballpark figure at least, of how far things are away on the map. Alright, we're going to go to another key major change in this new version, and it's that they adjusted the melee modifiers so that the defenders now suffer a negative 10% high fatigue penalty and a negative 20% max fatigue penalty. Now, this only affects units with 600 plus fatigue points. It's not that big of a deal. I know people might look at this and anything that hurts the defenders, they're going to say, well, that's not fair. Well, I mean, come on. If your units are exhausted and they can hardly stand up, do you really think they're going to be doing all that well in the melee? Probably not. So I have no problem with this rule. Units which are heavily fatigued deserve to have a penalty, and they shouldn't be in your front lines. That's just a fact. Another key major change that they made is that they adjusted it so that artillery cannot unlimber within forests or villages unless they have a clear non-forest or village hex in any direction. And there's another part to that. Artillery in forests and villages will not benefit from a defensive hex bonus versus ranged attacks if the attack is directed through a clear hex side. Now let's take a look at this in an actual game so we can understand it a little bit better. What we have here is Battlefield Antietam, and this is a scenario that I created just to test out a few things. The first thing we're going to do is take this federal battery here in the middle of these woods and try to change their formation. When we do that, you'll see on the bottom left it says artillery cannot unlimber within forests and towns. So moving forward, you will no longer be able to do that. It's going to change the way you play a little bit, but I don't think too many people unlimbered guns in the woods anyway, so it shouldn't have that great of an effect. If you move these guns forward to the edge of the woods, well, then you can change their formation because the rule says unless they have a clear hex in any direction. Well, in this instance, they do, therefore, they can change formations. Now, the second part of this rule, I would argue, is more important to know than the first part. It says that artillery in forests and villages will not benefit from a defensive hex bonus versus ranged attacks if the attack is directed through a clear hex side. That is important to remember. In the past, when you set up artillery on the edge of a field, they would benefit from the forest defensive hex bonus. In this case, it would be 40%. In the future, that's not going to be the case, and let's use this as an example. Now, these Confederate guns here are going to fire into this hex here. In the past, as I said, they would have a 40% modifier, but with this new version, that is no longer the case. You will see the modifier is 0. So that's a pretty important change to remember. Your guns are not going to be as safe as they used to be when on the edge of a field. Now, what do you do in order to bring back a little bit of that defensive bonus? Well, you can still do one thing. If you build breastworks that front a field and your artillery is within those woods, you do still enjoy that breastwork defensive bonus. As you can see there, the modifier is -30. In previous versions, that modifier would be -70, making it much more difficult for anyone to damage your guns when they were in the woods, fronting an open field. Now, what do I think about this change? I think it's good. I think it is more historically accurate and that it makes much more sense overall. So this is another thing that I would argue WDS has done correctly with this new version. The last key major change that I'm sure everyone's been waiting to talk about and to see what I have to say about it is the one with the adjustment to melee modifiers. Now, I'm not going to read all this because I'm going to break it down instead, and you're going to see it's not really that intimidating. Here is the first part of the new rule. If there are defending units that have not fired in the current turn, but the units are able to fire on the attacking units and the defender's strength is greater than or equal to the attacker's strength, then 10% is subtracted from the attacking strength. Now, if you are attacking against a hex that contains more men than you are attacking with, that's probably the root cause of some of your problems if you lose a lot of games. So, this is a giant who cares. The thought process behind it is perfectly fine, and I have no problem with the rule. Because you should penalize people for making poor decisions. This isn't going to affect really anybody, because the overwhelming majority of people don't launch melees against larger stacks. That's not the way to win games. So, again, you don't even have to worry about this part of the rule. Now, let's get to the more controversial one. However, if the defender's strength is only greater than or equal to half the attacker's strength, then only 5% is subtracted. This is the part of the rule that I think a lot of people are concerned about, because this is an extremely much more likely scenario that you're going to run into on a regular basis while playing these games. So, let's use a quick example of how this would work out. Let's say you have 500 attackers, and you are going up against 300 defenders. The melee probability that the attackers would win this is about 50%. So it's a coin flip situation. With this new rule in play, let's assume that there is no defensive fire, and so this rule kicks in. The attackers lose 5% of their strength with this new rule. So those 500 attackers become 475 attacking against 300 defenders. So your coin flip situation then becomes a 45% situation once you do all the math. Does this rule really affect all that much? It really depends on your point of view. But for me, when I look at the entire rule, I just try to remind myself and others not to overthink it. The first part of the rule is inconsequential because you should never attack larger stacks anyways, so that part of the rule I don't care about. With the second part of this rule, it just reinforces what we've always said about melee, and that is you should always attack with a more than a 2-to-1 advantage. That's all there is to it. If you're doing that, you do not need to worry about this rule whatsoever. Thinking about this a little bit more deeply, ask yourself, why would they create this rule? And I think there are some interesting answers to that question once you examine it and really think about it. My opinion, and this is just my opinion, is that this feels like a reaction to the inadequacies of automated defensive fire, because this rule only kicks in if the defending unit is not firing. And how many times have we had situations in which an enemy launches a melee against our line and our defenders don't fire? I mean, we've all been there. You slam on the desk, you scream, you cry, you rip your hair out. It's so aggravating. And so this feels like a reaction to perhaps some of those inadequacies of automated defensive fire that we've always talked about and we've always felt. And I think this rule also does something else. I think it's trying to decrease the number of melees being launched. Why would they want that? What is the purpose? Why would WDS be trying to create a rule that might affect the number of melees being launched? Well, think about it. As a matter of fact, take a look. This is a Civil War painting. The two sides are standing apart from one another and engaging in ranged fire. Our club has, for a long time, been a melee-happy club. We do a lot of hand-to-hand combat, when in reality, in the Civil War, that wasn't all that common. Instances like Spotsylvania were the exception and not the rule, whereas in our club, a situation like you see on the screen is not really that common. People close ground, they engage, they get into melee combat almost instantaneously in most instances. And how realistic is that? It's just not very realistic, and we all know it. So I think WDS is trying to actually just recreate this. They want to bring back some more historical flavor to the WDS Civil War series. They want to try, I think, and cut down on the number of melees being launched because it had grown to such an extent that it was no longer historically accurate. Am I right? I don't know. That's just my theory. But all the pieces and all the parts of version 4.04 lead me to believe that they're trying to make the games more historically accurate through these changes. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? Do you agree with me? Put it in the comments. If you think I'm crazy, put that in the comments. I'm curious what you all think about it. So in general, my takeaways from version 4.04, I love it. I think they did so many things right with this version. I think all the things that they did to help newer players getting started are genius. I really do. Having a rangefinder, having a tool that will show people how far they can move, that's great. That's going to help people learn the game faster. Having the line of sight recalculate whenever you make a movement, that makes everyone's life easier, and you can avoid ambushes, and you can avoid making stupid moves because now you can actually see what's in front of you. That's a great improvement for them to make. With this melee rule and some of these other ones where they've taken away some of the gamey tactics, I'm okay with that also. I think it'll bring in more historical flavor to these games. So overall, WDS has hit a home run with this new version. I'm thrilled about it, and I can't wait to play it. And I hope everyone else is excited too. There's a lot to love here. Alright, thank you for watching this special episode of A Game and a Chair. I really do hope you've learned something about this new version. If you did like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment down below about how awesome it is. And also, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel for the American Civil War Gaming Club. Turn on the notifications. You will get ringed whenever we drop a new episode, and I hope to do that fairly frequently in the future. If you are looking for a home to play these Civil War WDS games, check us out at acwgc.net. We would love to welcome you into the club. It is a very friendly group, and it is always active. Thank you guys for watching, and until I see you next time, just keep gaming.